Personally, I would like to thank the 5 men who showed up tonight. And from a man's point of view, this is an indication that we don't have many problems. But thanks for representing, anyway. So, generally what I do in these presentations is I do an introductory presentation on a Friday night and a full day on a Saturday. And I don't really want to do that introductory presentation because I have done it here before. And those of you that are holding one of these, that's what that comes out of. So, and also I'm not going to talk about the presence process either because it's all in the book. I actually don't know what I'm going to talk about because I've just barred those 2 things out now. But alchemy, as a subject, and also alchemy and its relationship with intimacy. And now many of us, when we hear the word intimacy, we think sex, which is natural, but that means we've exiled the experience of intimacy into the physical. Intimacy, the definition in this work with intimacy is into me and see. It's entering a journey in which every aspect of my life enables me to see deeper into what I am, and therefore what God is for me, and therefore where it is I am right now. Because that's one of the questions we ask. Well, we ask, who am I, which is a misleading question, because it always delivers us to personality. It's really what am I is a more appropriate, more efficient question to ask. And then we ask, who is God? And if we answer that question, we're going to get some indoctrination from some cult that's become a religion or whatever that's telling us who God is for us. More efficient is what is God? But one question that we very seldom ask is where are we? We assume that we're our physical address. I live at 66 Witherspoon or whatever. And we assume when we're physically transfixed beings, we assume we know where we are. But the thing about those 3 questions is they all have the same answer. And the answer can't be understood. And understanding can't really help us answer the question, because the answer has to be realized through experience, experientially. So, those of you taking notes, I would invite you to have the experience now, instead of saving it for later. Really, because anything that's to be gained from here that is of any value at all, because you see, I don't have any notes, so it's really unfair that you have notes. I'm choosing to show up, and just be here, right? Sorry to spoil the fun. But really, what is to be gained from this evening is through being here and receiving something here tonight that you can receive if you're open to it. Receiving is the most challenging thing for us to do, is to receive. Because we cannot receive while we are trying to get something. We cannot receive while we are trying to get something. Because what we think we need to get, our needs and wants, are being driven by a condition in our emotional body, by imprinting in the first 7 years of our life. And that drives us into this idea that if I do this, if I take notes tonight, then I will get it. Right? If I do something, right, I will get it. But actually, To receive requires being, because what we want to receive is a realization of our being, right? So let's just be here tonight and just see how that is. And anyway, I have a whole website on which you can go and revisit all this, and whatever we talk about tonight, it's going to come out in another book and you can go and read it, right? So it'll be available to you, and trust yourself. Trust your experience that what you require shows up when you require it. And anything tonight that you receive that you believe you've lost by the end of the evening, you haven't. It will show up when you require it. Trust that. Trust that we always receive what we require. What we require is very different from what we need and want. They're very different. We don't even know what we require. We wouldn't even recognize it. We barely know what we need and want. And reaching for our needs and wants hasn't accomplished very much. Because if it did, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight. Right? So, let's start there. So, alchemy. The story of alchemy is of taking base metal and turning it into gold. Taking something that appears to be of no value and turning it into something precious. That's what alchemy is about. So if we're physically transfixed, we'll go around and find metal and look for the philosopher's stone and boil the two together and see if it'll turn it into gold, right? We'll do something physical. If we're mentally transfixed, we'll go and study the art of magic. You know, all the stuff, right? Think that we can understand how to do this. But alchemy is only available to us when we enter the heart. Because alchemy is about feeling. The alchemical moment takes place through the medium of feeling, not thinking and not doing. And every one of us sitting in this room are alchemists. Every one of us. Right? We just don't realize it yet. Well, some of us I'm sure do. But when I say realize, I'm talking about our real eyes. If we approach things mentally, we use our anal eyes. We analyze everything and think that if we can understand something, that's the world we've come out of, right? If I can understand what's going on with me, I can heal myself. And I'm prepared to pay a fortune to go and sit and talk to someone with the hope that talking to them will help me understand what's going on, so that if I can just understand it, I'll be healed. Right? So that's the mental approach. That's using our anal eyes, right? And then we have our physical eyes, in which we relate to the physical world. So there are three stories. There are three stories that we tell. Most of us are telling the first story. Few of us in this world get to tell the second story, and very few get to tell the third. The first story is the bad one. All the really bad things that have happened to me, and why I'm sad, and why things don't work out, and why I'm trying to make myself feel better constantly. That's the first story. And that's a story told by doers. When we believe something we can do can change the quality of our experience, can impact the causal point of the quality of our experience, that's the story we're telling. Most of us are telling that story. And when we're telling that story, we're looking for someone else to do it for us. If this person can do it for me, if I believe they can do it for me, I'm going to put them in the White House. If I believe they can do it for me, I'm going to go to their church. If I believe they can do it for me, I will follow them and become their disciple. Right? I'm looking for someone to do it for me. And that story of the bad story is coming from the victim and victor place. And we all get to tell that story. We all begin in that story. And that's really the story we're entrained into. Because that's often the story our parents are telling, our politicians are telling, even our priests are telling, right? The bad story, right? Then, and that story is really about the physical and the mental. It's really about this place here. The only word you need to remember tonight is vimp. It's the word for the evening, vimp, right? Vibrational, emotional, mental, physical, right? And that is the heart. Just anyone didn't realize that. When we tell the bad story, we're in this place. We're actually very much in this place. We're in a very mental place. We're looking at the physical world from here. We have very little awareness of what's going on in the emotional. We're looking at the physical place, and based on what we see, we tell stories, and based on the stories we tell, we behave physically, and we just bounce backwards and forwards there. And that's the victim-victor place. And in the energetic system, we're in the first three chakras. We're kind of down here. It's all happening down here, right? And there's a lot of fear, anger, and grief. Although the fear, anger, and grief is happening to us. The world is happening to us. This physical is happening to us. The movement of energy is not going this way, it's going this way. Things are happening to me, not through me. Then, when grace intercedes, and we have enough upsets, which are also called setups, right? And really, it's really about grace. That's the only way that one can explain why someone would go from this story into the good story. And the good story is different. The good story is when I realize that all the bad things happening to me, I can take responsibility for. This is what the presence process is about awakening us to, and what alchemy of the heart. That we are responsible for the quality of our experience, because the quality of our experience is determined by the time we are 7 years old. By the time we are 7 years old, our emotional body is already imprinted with patterns through experiences we have. And those patterns, although we lose an awareness of our emotional body, of the condition of our emotional body, because at the age of 7, we enter magic school, the mental institution, right? We all get institutionalized. And we become mental. Girls are allowed to remain emotional longer. Boys are not. Boys got to stop at 7. That's it, right? No more emotion display from you. If you display emotion, you're weak. Girls get to display emotion a bit longer, and that's why young girls are more mature than young boys, because maturity is based on emotional development, not physical and mental development. We can see physically developed human beings who seem to be quite mentally advanced behaving like 7-year-olds in this world because they haven't matured their emotional body, right? So by the time we're 7, we have an emotional body condition. Our emotional body is already imprinted through all the felt experiences we've had in the first 7 years of our life. But our awareness of our emotional body condition, our felt perception, gets shut down as we become institutionalized and we enter magic school. And when we enter magic school, we get taught magic. And from the time we get taught magic, everything becomes a story. And whether you realize it or not, every one of you are master magicians. It's just that if you've been reading Harry Potter, you don't know what magic is. Magic becomes fantasy. And the reality, which is magic, becomes invisible. But when we go to school, we get taught to spell words, because words are the roots of all spells, right? And once we know how to spell enough words, we get taught sentences, which we use to sentence ourselves and to others around us to certain perceptual realities. And once we're taught enough sentences, we get taught stories. Whose story? His story, the mental body's version of reality. And once we believe the history we are told, We also embrace the means by which it is delivered to us, the art of storytelling. By the time we are 14, we are storytellers. And you know what? We believe our stories, and our stories have power, right? So from 14 years onwards into our adult experience, we have very limited awareness of the emotional content of our being. We don't have any insight to be able to see inwards into our experience, to the emotional part. We have almost no insight. In fact, all our awareness is outside. It's outside. And so our condition of our emotional body is no longer something we can see as something happening within us and being reflected off the world. It now appears as things happening to us. There is fear, anger, and grief around us. We experience fear, anger, and grief, but it's not anything to do with me. It's happening to me, right? And in that condition, we're always going to tell the first story. Only when we realize that underlying all our physical circumstances that are causing us discomfort, and underlying all the stories we've been telling ourselves about what's going on, only when we realize that underlying that is an uncomfortable emotional signature, and when we impact that emotional signature, that we see that impacting the emotional signature transforms what's going on in the mental body and transforms the way we are experiencing the physical world. Only when we realize that and start to enter an experience of impacting our emotional body do we start to tell the second story. And the second story is the good one, right? So I'll give you an example. My bad story is, when I was a little boy, my father committed suicide. And very soon after my father committed suicide, almost instantly, my mother became emotionally unavailable, right? It was terrible. I lost both my parents on the same day, right? And so that impacted me with so much fear, anger, and grief in my life that I developed this painful condition that I had for 10 years. I used to bang my head against concrete just to stop the pain. It was amazing. And I used to have 8 attacks a day. And this went on for nearly 10 years. I lost my girlfriend, my job, my car. I ended up in poverty many times because of it. People couldn't be around me because they couldn't do anything for me, right? That's my bad story. That's a really bad one. Being a Leo, I had to make it really dramatic in this life. Really? Okay. So then what happened was, in my search, because I went and tried to do things physically to myself, I had my wisdom teeth taken out, cortisone injections in my face, took all sorts of pharmaceuticals, went to witch doctors and sangomas, had spiritual healers dancing around me. I did it, crystals, everything, right? Nothing worked. Then I went and did the mental stuff. I shall be well, I am well, I am well. I really am well, even though I'm very well, okay? And I did all the mental stuff. I tried to get my macabre back in shape and everything, and balance up my chakras and everything, all the mental stuff, right? Nothing. Nothing. Until someone pointed out that I was really pissed off. Do you know how angry you are? I'm a nice person. I'm a nice, helpful person. Ever since my mother kind of became weird after my father died, I spent all my time helping her out. I'm very nice. I say yes when I mean no, and no when I mean yes. Very nice. I can't be angry at all, right? And then I discovered how angry I was. And when the anger came up, I got the shock of my life, right? Couldn't believe it. Once it came out, I couldn't put it away. I couldn't deny the fact that I was really angry, right? And so I started taking a look at my anger and my fear and my grief and trying to mess with them. I'm going to get rid of this. Get rid of this, all right? Bad emotions, right? Get the hints, right? Or all the stuff. Sage. Anything to get rid of this emotional state, right? But it only when I realized that it wasn't me that was angry. It wasn't me, the adult. I kind of started figuring this out around 36 years old. We're having a short. Too much energy in the room. I realized it wasn't me that was angry. It wasn't me that was sad. It wasn't me that was afraid as an adult. That's why it didn't make sense to me. It was the 7-year-old, right? And I realized I had to get to that 7-year-old. I literally had to time travel. I had to find a way to get back and become that child's parent, because it was in a real state. And you know what they say? The child is created in the image of God. In other words, it has the same creative capacities, which means if the child is angry and seeking revenge, your life is going to be full of self-sabotage and all sorts of things, right? So I had to find a way to get back there and be with that part of myself. Not say, don't be angry, don't be afraid, don't be scared, but allow that part of myself to feel that way, to bring those feelings up and allow those feelings to be without any condition placed upon them, so that that energy that was blocked could start to move. And once it started to move, the pain started to subside. And the more I enabled it to move, the more the pain subsided. And eventually, a condition which I was told had no cause and no cure was gone. And I went, right? And that's when I was able to tell my good story. My good story, when I realized when I went through that whole journey, then I can tell my good story. Hold on, there's something here that's not groovy at all. Hold on. So my good story is that my father committed suicide, and consequently I went in the world searching for my father, psychologically, looking for my father. And through that search, I established a real relationship with what God is for me. I found my real father. And my mother, when I went as a child, I went off in the way looking for a way to fix my mother, because I knew there was something wrong with her heart, right? And I went around and eventually I developed the presence process. Why? I suddenly realized one day, I developed the presence process to fix my mother. And that's when I stopped trying to fix my mother, right? So that's my good story. Like the things that happened in my life that were terrible have brought so much grace, because without them we wouldn't even be standing in this room. So that's my good story. But there's another story. We have to do something about this. Where's Wendy? I'm going to hold it. That's a good idea. We got it taped. So we tell our bad story, and now we'll find out if we've really got it taped. I think we're sorted. Group effort. So we get to tell our bad story first, which is really about, it's a mental, physical experience. Once we bring that energy up into the heart center and we start to engage with the causal point of our experience through feeling, not feeling to get rid of the emotions. Because what I discovered along the way was that my fear, anger, and grief were my most precious of gems, the most precious jewels that I had. Before I had integrated my grief, my fear, before I looked at my fear and been able to sit in the midst of my fear without trying to do anything about it, without telling stories, by just being in the fear so that energy could move through me, I was unable to make crucial decisions in my life. There were points in my life because I couldn't discern. You see, when we're afraid, energetically, anything that strange comes towards us, we energetically run. And when you're running away, you can't be discerning. You're just running. So I found that being with my fear, I was able to become discernment, just organically became part of my nature. And then the anger was a really important one. It's one that we all are looking at now, right? We're living in one of the angriest countries in the world. We don't realize it because we put our anger in another country. We move it over there, right? Because that's how we are in ourselves. We always put our emotional states away from us. This is something happening to us. It's not because of us, right? But our anger is really important. Anger is like a friction. These states within us, fear, anger, and grief, these are points of resistance in the emotional body. When the emotional body is not flowing freely, when it gets blocked and goes into resistance, it creates friction, and that creates heat, and that heat buildup is very uncomfortable. And we have 3 names that we spell. Remember, we're magicians. We spell stuff. We spell it fear, we spell it anger, we spell it grief. But these are 3 different dysfunctional states of the emotional body. Anger is the most powerful friction of them all. But friction is really important. When a train wants to move, its wheels need to grip the rails. If there is no friction, the train will not move forward, no matter how powerful the train. But if we do not integrate our anger, if we suppress it, there will be places all around our life where we live with our brakes on, because it requires friction to stop the wheels moving too. So I noticed that there were places in my life where there was no movement. My finances, many areas of my life that were just stayed stuck and stagnant. And only when I was able to sit in my anger and be with my anger without telling stories. And you know, anger is the best storyteller on the planet. Look at the stories it's told us over the last couple of years that we've bought into, and the consequence of those stories. If you believe and act on the stories of anger, it just creates hatred and more anger. Anything that comes out of fear, anger, and grief leads into fear, anger, and grief. It can't be any other way. And anger is very difficult because you are allowed to be afraid. You can be as afraid as you want, right? There's lots of medications to give you if you're afraid. Pharmaceuticals, right? And you're allowed to be as sad as you want. But you are not allowed to be angry. And if you want to test this out, go to an airport. Bless you. And bless you again.
Thank you.
You can go in an airport and be really, really afraid. I'm so scared. I'm scared about someone's carrying a weird bag and I'm really scared, right? And they'll go, don't worry. Here's a tablet. This is some medicine for you, right? You can go into an airport and be really sad. I'm so sad about what's happening in the country. I'm really so sad about it, right? And someone will say, it's okay. Here's some medicine, right, to calm you down. But you go into an airport and be angry. You'll be lucky if you get out there alive. You're not allowed to be angry. And so because we aren't allowed to be angry here, we're not allowed to feel our anger. It's not about taking it out on other people. It's about allowing us to feel how angry we are. It's only by feeling it. It's only by feeling it that it will move on. What do I mean by that? The way that we were brought up, right, our paradigm that we've come out of, is if a child comes into the room and the child is angry, you know, the child comes in the room, don't be angry, have a sweet, go play outside, or go to your room, don't be angry, right? And a parent will behave like that when they haven't integrated their own anger. Anyone who has not integrated their own anger does not want to have anger around them. They become really nice to avoid any form of conflict. No conflict around me, right? I will say yes when I mean no, and no when I mean yes, just to avoid conflict, because I haven't integrated my anger. And the last thing I want is children around me reflecting what's going on inside of me. But the thing about that child, if you tell it to stop being angry in that moment, energy is like water. Think of the emotional body. That's why we use the water element to represent emotion. Water can flow, and you can block it. If you block the flow of water and there is no outlet, it builds and it builds and it builds and it builds, right? That child's attention, even if you put a sweet in its mouth and send it to play outside, that child's attention will hook onto that anger where it has not come to a point of resolution, and it will never leave it until it resolves. That aspect of its attention will never go out and play again. It'll always be there, right? But as we move into mental awareness, as we start going completely mental, we don't even know that's going on. We just have experiences around us that make us annoyed, irritated, and we think it's because of things happening to us, but it's our own fuming anger inside, right? And that sweet that you give the child will become all sorts of other things that it will put in its mouth. So if a child comes into the room who's angry and you have integrated your own anger, it won't make you angry. You can't make someone angry who doesn't have anger in them, right? Who's not resisting their own anger. And if that child comes in as angry and you've integrated your own anger, you would just say, wow, you're angry. Something must have made you angry. Well, that's valid. Anger is valid. It's valid to be angry when you're angry. I tell you what, you be angry and I will be with you. While you're angry, I'll just be with you. And if you sit with a child while it's angry, you'll see that its anger will peak, and then there'll be tears, and then there'll be quiet, peace, and then it'll automatically run and go and play outside without having a sweet stuck in its mouth, because it is naturally playful, right? It's the same with us. Unless we allow ourselves to feel this unintegrated condition in our emotional body, unless we allow ourselves to feel it, it remains blocked in resistance. It's the feeling of it without condition. Feeling without condition that allows that energy to move on. And the thing about the energy, it's like water. If a spring comes out the ground, it doesn't need a GPS system to know where the ocean is. If you leave it alone, it will flow to the ocean. It's the same with our emotional states. If we allow them to be, and this is not about, if you don't go into a story and if you don't project the behavior onto people around you, if you allow yourself to feel those emotional states and be with them, and initially it's kind of scary because why? No one is allowed to feel. That's what it means, have a nice day. Have a nice day means have a day in which you don't feel anything. Because if you do feel something, you might have to go and see someone about that, right? I mean, what does the word nice mean? Have you ever thought about that? It doesn't have any meaning. It's a word that we use when we're emotionally numb. How are you? I'm fine. What the hell does that mean? What does it mean? Right? I'm all right. I'm okay. These are words we use when we don't have any emotional body awareness. Right? So when we allow our anger to be, or our fear to be, or our grief to be, it moves on, and we will go through internal experiences. That moment of being with the condition of our emotional body just as it is, that moment, that's what alchemy is. That's the moment of alchemy. Being. Alchemy is the consequence of being. Alchemy is the... We'll do questions later. Yeah, hold it. Digest it. Alchemy is the consequence of being. And a good definition for being is, because people are like, what does it mean to be? Because we're so into doing stuff, we go like, how do I do that? Right? Being is, a good definition of being is to feel what is happening without placing any conditions on what you're feeling. To feel without placing any conditions. That awakens being, right? So through that experience, we will have time for questions later, maybe, but by then you might have had enough of me. Once we've gone into the emotional body, and we realize that out of my fear, anger, and grief comes discernment, I'm able to assert myself. You see, when I have anger, I become aggressive, or I become paralyzed. Unintegrated anger. I become aggressive, or I become depressed, because nothing I do ever works. And when I have grief, then I'm unable to feel anything deeply without falling over. So that's how you can tell where your fear, anger, and grief is. Wherever it is in your life that you cannot make decisions, you can't really decide on, that's the fear. That's the manifestation of the fear. Wherever in your life where things are stuck and they're just not moving, that's the anger. Wherever in our life where we say, I'm not even interested in that. I'm not even speaking to that person. I'm having nothing to do with that. I'm not even going to deal with that. That's the grief. That's the grief. These are all reflections of this internal state. So when I go in and I allow myself to feel these, right, and I see the consequences, there are consequences to this, to being with this. The one is discernment. I'm able to assert myself in the world, because it's very important to be able to assert yourself in this world. Assertion is conscious. Aggression is the same energy unconsciously. But to assert myself, to say no. Not no because I think you shouldn't do it. Just no. No is a complete sentence when you mean it. Right? Or yes. Also yes. We don't say yes enough, right? And then when I'm able to integrate my grief, I will be able to feel things really deeply without falling over. I'll be able to feel things really deeply without falling over. And the feeling capacity is crucial. Our feeling capacity is crucial. It's all about feeling. And when the penny drops about feeling and what role that plays, then you will realize the importance of going in and being able to tell the second story. Being able to go in and explore my unintegrated emotions and have them move on. Because there's insight. You see, when we're in the mental place, we have this belief that if I understand something, I can heal it. But the thing about understanding and the mental concepts based around understanding is that when we are initially imprinted, we don't have this mental language. So those of you that are telling like these grandeur stories about what happened to you in childhood, when you actually never even had to say, well, when I was a child, I was abandoned, right? Think about this, if you want to think. A 3-year-old, when I was 3, I was abandoned, right? A 3-year-old, if you go to any 3-year-old and say, what's going on with you, won't go, I'm being abandoned. Don't have the vocabulary. So we're trying to use vocabulary we have now to integrate an experience in which that vocabulary didn't exist. We're trying to get there with language that we didn't have. The language we used when we were here was feeling, felt perception. These imprints are feelings. And there's something else about these feelings. They're not personal. It's not personal. When we tell a story, we make it personal. There's nothing personal about it. Because when you sink into your imprint and you see it within yourself and how it's impacted your mental activity and your physical circumstances and you see that imprint for what it is, what you will realize is that it exists in your mother and father, in your brothers and sisters, the very same imprint. And it exists in your grandparents and in their parents. In fact, this condition of the emotional body is being passed on. It's called the human race, right? The one generation holds the baton and runs. And the children go, okay, I'm ready for it. Bring me, and runs on, right? Then they grow up, right? Find someone who reflects this issue, like find someone who looks like, represents their parents, marries them, right? And then has children and passes the baton on. And it goes on for generation after generation after generation. It's not personal. What you will realize about your fear, anger, and grief, it's been passed from generation to generation. It's the emotional signature. And the thing is, your mother and father had a story about how it came to them, how it impacted them. And your grandparents had a story about how it impacted them. And you know what? All the stories are different. What's true is the emotional signature. Is the emotional signature. But what's astounding is that when this part of our being is suppressed from our awareness, when we live in a mental, physical place, we really live in a perceptual way that is back to front. And the story that illustrates this is one of the first stories that I tell in the Alchemy of the Heart, of a man walking around a street one night. He's walking down a street, and he comes across another man on his hands and knees. He's looking for something under a street light. And he says, you lost something? And he says, yeah, I lost my key. He says, can I help you look for it? He says, I would appreciate that. And so they look together, but it's a very small area of illumination. Very small area of... So after a minute or two, he says, are you sure you lost your key here? He says, no, actually I lost it at home. He says, well, why are you looking for it here? It's because my lights don't work at home. And that's how we are. We're looking outside for something that got lost inside. We're using outside to try and realize what can only be realized through insight. Insight, not understanding. The mental body and the physical body cannot answer the questions, what am I, what is God for me, and where are we now? It cannot answer the questions. That is external illumination. It doesn't have the capacity. Why? Because, first of all, the mental body, which we rely on for everything, thought form has no feeling capacity. It can't feel anything. Therefore, it can't even, has no point of reference for being. The only thing the mental body does is, we do, we get results. We do, we get results. That's all. It has no point of reference for being. And when we're in this state and we suppressed our emotional, our perceptual capacity is so distorted that we actually believe we have to make peace. We actually believe we have to make peace, right? The idea that we have to make peace is delusional, right? Watch our leaders. The reason why our leaders annoy us is because they reflect us. And we want leaders that don't reflect us. We want leaders who behave in a way that we don't. But we're always going to have the leaders that reflect us. And what do our leaders do? They believe that we have to make peace, right? And so they say, this is how our leaders make peace. You all shut up and sit still. And if you don't shut up and sit still, I will send someone in to shut you up and sit you still so that we can be at peace. Right? But peace is not an arrangement of physical circumstances. Never, ever in our history has peace been accomplished through rearranging physical circumstances or enforcing one circumstance on another. Because peace isn't a physical arrangement. The other way that we like to make peace is our great peace organizations, right? And what our peace organizations say is, I tell you what, why don't you bring your manifesto, and you bring your manifestos, and we'll sit and discuss peace. and what's required for peace. And once we agree, we'll sign a document in front of the media and hallelujah, there shall be peace. But peace isn't a mental concept either. Peace has never been acquired through agreement. Peace was created. It's not something that you can make. Because peace is a vibration, right? It's a vibration we have to feel to know that it is. We feel at peace. We don't think or do at peace. We feel at peace. It's even in our language. But if our emotional body is in such a state that we are consistently suppressing and sedating our feelings because they're so uncomfortable, that our life becomes around trying to feel better. We're always trying to feel better. Maybe this will help me feel better. Maybe a big plate of food will help me feel better. Maybe more sex will help me feel better. Maybe joining a spiritual path will help me feel better. But it's not about feeling better. It's about getting better at feeling. It's a completely different ballgame. When we allow ourselves to feel our fear, anger, and grief, we awaken our capacity to feel. When I sit in my fear and I allow it to be there, it automatically, organically awakens my capacity to feel. When I sit in my anger and I allow my anger to be there, it automatically, organically awakens my capacity to feel. The same with my grief. It awakens my capacity to feel. It awakens felt perception. I begin to be able to feel my presence in this world and the consequence of being in this world. We're in a big mess right now. You know why? Because no one can feel the consequence of their presence in this world. We can't feel the consequence of our thoughts, words, and deeds. We don't have felt perception. We think about what we're going to do, and then we act on our thoughts. It's got nothing to do with the way we feel. When last did you go for a job interview and the person said, so how's your heart? How are you feeling now? Right? No one cares. But unless we have a capacity to feel, but we want love. Love is a feeling. It's a vibration that you feel. We want peace. Peace is a feeling. Everything we're actually looking for is something that we are only able to, even what we are, to know what we are, we have to feel it. And feeling is the causal point of our whole experience. It's even in our language, right? If you leave here tonight and you feel good, you had a good time. It doesn't matter what you thought or what I did, but if you leave and you feel good, it was a good evening because you felt good. If you leave here and you feel horrible, it was a horrible evening. Then you'll tell yourself stories of why it was horrible, but it was horrible because of how you're feeling. If we leave any situation feeling wonderful about it, it was a wonderful encounter. It doesn't matter what happened. It doesn't matter what stories. That's the power of feeling. Feeling is the causal point of the quality of our experience. We're doing things and we're trying to think up ways of feeling better. But we all say it's feeling, but we don't go to the feeling body. So when we go to the feeling body and we impact that part of our experience, then we begin to tell the good story. And the good story is always about grace. Wow. Everything that happened in my life was deliberate. The word deliberate has the word liberate in it. It's liberating me. Through digesting my fear, anger, and grief, I've enlivened my capacity to feel. And life is a feeling. I want to feel alive. I don't want to think, I think I'm alive. I think alive, right? Or I do alive. I want to feel alive. While I suppress my fear, anger, and grief, I simultaneously suppress my capacity to feel. Then I think I have to make peace. We just have to feel it. But we have to awaken our feeling capacity. And awakening it is organic. It's organic. It happens naturally when we start allowing ourselves to feel the authentic condition of our emotional body without placing conditions on what we're feeling. So let's take about 15, 20 minutes break, and we'll come back and go deeper in.